This Week in Virology, the podcast about viruses, the kind that make you sick.
From MicrobeTV, this is TWiV. This Week in Virology, episode 1277, recorded on December 5th, 2025. I'm Vincent Racaniello, and you're listening to the podcast all about viruses. Joining me today from Austin, Texas, Rich Condit.
Hi there, Vincent. You caught me off guard here because I don't have my weather going. And it defaults, believe it or not, to Gainesville. I can tell you it's cool. I think last I looked, it was about 53, 54. So for around here, that's cool. And overcast, but we'll survive.
Here it is 0C in Chelsea, but I'm going to lose the contest because Angela Mingarelli in Montreal is going to be colder, right, Angela?
It is. Currently in Fahrenheit, it is 14 degrees, so that's minus 10 C. And this morning it was 1 degree Fahrenheit, minus 17. It is very cold. We have what is called a polar vortex in Montreal. That's what they call it. And it's supposed to be this cold all week.
You have snow?
We do have snow. Yes.
That's nice.
You don't?
No, there's no snow here.
Oh, yeah, we still have snow.
There's no snow here either.
Well, our guest today, coming back for the second time, he was last here in November 2022, so like 3 years ago, roughly, and I'm sure it's warm where he is. It's Jake Scott from Stanford. Welcome, Jake.
Thank you so much. It's really great to be back. It's 51 degrees here, which is actually kind of cold, I have to say. But that's for us, Californians. I did go to med school in Vermont, though, and went to Montreal for fun. And boy, it gets cold up there.
Mm-hmm. Vermont is very cold.
The average temperature in San Francisco is 56 degrees. And that average is because it's 56 degrees all the time.
Yeah. That's San Francisco, though. Other parts of the Bay are a lot warmer.
Yeah.
As you know.
As I know.
I checked Montreal's average temperature, Rich, year round, if you average it, is 7 degrees. So that's
Oh my gosh.
45.
It's terrible. Well, I would take 7 now because it's humid here and it hurts when it's humid and cold. But anyway, we're indoors. It's okay. If you like these programs about science, we'd love your support. We give you real science, no lies, no disinformation, which is de rigueur for this administration. We love your support. Go to microbe.tv/contribute. Different ways that you can help us out. So, Jake, when we were last here with Jake, we were talking about COVID because that was still in the middle of the pandemic. But now, even a more serious topic, we're going to talk about vaccine misinformation and the anti-vaccine sentiment expressed by this administration. And Jake has gotten very active, I noticed, in the last year or so, writing a lot and testifying and so forth. So, and there's a note here in the show notes. Let's remind everyone that RFK Jr. is not a scientist. He has no formal training in science. He is a lawyer. And he makes money by advising law firms who sue to get vaccine damages, vaccine.
I just wanted to add that point only because I feel like a lot of the public, even people have approached me, they think he's a scientist because he speaks with such conviction and he makes himself, he speaks with such confidence. And I'm like, no, he's not a scientist. He has no formal science training. So let's just start there.
Yeah. Aaron Siri, too. I would apply that to Aaron Siri as well.
Also.
Actually, real scientists don't necessarily speak with conviction. They say, you ask them for certainty, and they say, well,
that's why we shouldn't go to Senate hearings that are totally rigged.
That's what happened to you, right?
Yeah.
Maybe we'll talk about that later. But
No need to.
okay. I don't want to bring back bad memories. Siri is another lawyer, right?
Yep. And very ardent anti-vaccine activist and RFK Jr.'s advisor and lawyer. And yeah.
I really don't understand to this day, and I've been thinking about this for years, why there are anti-vaccine people. And unless, I mean, in the case of RFK Jr., he sort of has this ideology, right? He doesn't believe that viruses cause infections, but he also makes money off of it.
Right. And so does Aaron Siri and his whole campaign. And then there's a whole litigation network and a whole vaccine injury network. And they're making tons of money. And yet, they constantly accuse people like me and Peter Hotez of just, being pharma shills, right? And being conflicted. And I should say from the outset here that I've made this clear multiple times. I do have zero financial conflicts of interest. It's all public information. But yeah, those guys, they definitely have conflicts of interest financially.
Yeah, I have no conflicts of interest. Do you, Angela? Probably not.
I definitely do not.
I don't think Rich does
Rich?
either.
Nope.
No, I don't have any. I don't get paid anything. They say we're farmer shills, but we're not. We don't get paid any money. We're just scientists who look at the data. And anyway, but before we start talking, remind us what you do for a living, Jake.
Yeah, so I'm a clinical associate professor of medicine at Stanford, and I'm an infectious diseases physician. So I spend most of my time seeing patients. I'm a full-time clinician. As we talked about 3 years ago, I primarily see patients who are hospitalized, and I'm consulted to see patients with a wide variety of infectious diseases. And sometimes they don't have infection. So oftentimes, an ICU doctor will call me, like today, with a patient who's got an elevated white blood cell count, but no obvious source of infection, that sort of thing. So that's what I do on a day-to-day basis. I also have clinic, so I see patients in the office. HIV has been a long-standing special interest. I'm the primary HIV provider here. And I've got a number of other specialties. A fungal infection called coccidiomycosis is a passion of mine. So yeah, I'm a full-time clinician, and then on the side, I'm doing more and more sort of academic work and research. I've been quite involved this past year, or these past 7 months or so, doing some major comprehensive vaccine reviews. So just finished collaborating with an amazing team. We did a systematic review that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine on COVID, RSV, and influenza vaccines. That took up a massive amount of my time when I wasn't seeing patients. And then I'm also doing another review that we can talk about that's compiling and classifying all the randomized control vaccine trials. And then I was telling Rich at the beginning, since we both went to UC Santa Cruz, I was a literature major, which is what I talked about in the last show. I won't go into all that, but I've got a real passion for writing, a bit of an obsession. So I spend a lot of time writing these days, op-eds and things like that. And I write for CIDRAP as well on a regular basis.
Also, you've written for STAT, right?
Yeah. And the Conversation, a number of other outlets, but I've got a regular gig now with CIDRAP, which is awesome.
That's cool.
So you must have in excess of 24 hours in your day.
I don't sleep much. Don't tell my mom.
So that was the first on my list. This you started a Google Doc spreadsheet listing all the randomized clinical trials of vaccines. So why did you do that?
Yeah, so back in April, I had just gotten back from ESCMID, this European Clinical Microbiology and Infectious Diseases Conference in Europe. It was in Vienna. And I gave a talk there on the use of social media for educating infectious diseases folks. And coincidentally, soon after I got back, I saw this conversation on X, which I still call Twitter, where a UK-based infectious disease doctor had called out RFK Jr., saying that the idea that vaccines haven't been tested against placebo controls is false. And a friend of mine and someone I've collaborated with before, Dr. Brad Spellberg, he's the chief medical officer at LA County, and very highly respected infectious disease specialist. He said he replied to this guy Neil Stone on X, and he said, well, let's actually dig into the data and see how many vaccine trials have been done with placebo controls, and he proposed that we do a crowdsourced sort of effort. And I just happened to see that, and I said, yeah, I'm in. And so we launched this public Google sheet. I seeded it with 7 trials, and we included a number of pieces of information about each paper or each trial. The year it was published, the number of participants, the placebo-controlled type, whether it was a placebo control or a different type of control, and then some basic information about the primary outcome, and then some of the results. And then we also had not only the PubMed ID, but also a link, a hyperlink to the actual paper. And so I started it with these 7 trials, and then posted that on X, and it took off. So within 24 hours, infectious disease physicians and pharmacists and clinicians and everyone worldwide logged another dozen trials covering almost 1 million participants. By week 3, we had 125 trials. And so it was this crowdsourced sheet that evolved into this curated database. And so we wanted to make sure that we had, verifiable evidence that anybody could look up. We really emphasize the transparency of it all. It's still completely open to the public; anybody can view it. And so instead of debating, these sort of slogans and sound bites, we built this live public catalog of every vaccine randomized controlled trial we could find.
Now, RFK Jr. says that the placebo has to be saline. What's your response to that?
Yeah, so as we all know, every trial shouldn't have to use saline. Early trials used a lot of saline placebos when there wasn't a proven vaccine, right? But once a proven vaccine, clearly prevents paralysis, say, or death, then ethical equipoise shifts, right? And so you have to stop randomizing kids, say, to pure saline, and compare them to the standard of care. I mean, one analogy would be, it's like I just went skydiving for my first time, which was awesome. I got a bit motion sick coming down, so I don't totally recommend it. But one analogy is, we wouldn't want to push someone out of a plane without a parachute and compare that to someone with a parachute, obviously, and because we know what would happen. So we can't randomize participants to a control that puts them at risk. And I should also say that it's not just a matter of saline. I mean, there are one thing our project has revealed is that there have been so many different types of controls, many of which are completely inert. So there's PBS or phosphate buffer saline. There's simple buffers, with sugar, for instance. So a placebo can basically be a number of things that just doesn't contain the antigen or adjuvant. You could also have an adjuvant placebo, right? And let's not minimize those. And then there are excipients, that don't have the antigen but contain biologically active, excipients like albumin, culture media, et cetera.
Maybe it would be the wording more than anything, saying placebo, because it is true that by definition, obviously in science, we go by definitions where people say inert placebo. But if you have a new vaccine, let's say the influenza vaccine of 2026, and you're comparing it to the influenza vaccine of 2025, it's technically not maybe the right term to say. It's a control, but maybe placebo or inert control. I think it's just wording, because in the end, you're not going to put someone at deliberate risk, like you said, or a child, leaving them with saline, and the other child gets a vaccine that could potentially save their life in the future, and the other one you're just leaving, just in case. That's unethical. So I think it's like a lot of it is just nomenclature.
I think that's a great point. People tend to sort of confuse or conflate, placebo with control or comparator even, because it's nuanced, But that's the thing about this current era is nuance gets very lost and dominated by sound bites.
Do you have any sense for what the motivation is behind saying that there ought to be the placebo ought to be saline only, and what the implications would be for instituting that as policy?
Yeah, good question. So this has been a talking point amongst anti-vaccine activists for a number of years. This is not new. At least going back 10 years or so. I think the idea is that it sounds compelling. It sounds concerning, when you say that these studies haven't been tested against a placebo. And so, Aaron Siri, for instance, has been talking about, and I think he was just talking this morning at ACIP about childhood vaccines not having been tested against placebo. So I think that it's to undermine confidence in vaccines. What the intent is beyond that, I could only guess. If it makes it easier to sue vaccine manufacturers and defend people who claim vaccine injuries, it's complex, but it has been a talking point for a while. Kennedy's been talking about it for the past few years at least.
So if there were a policy established where you could only approve vaccines that had a saline placebo, does that mean that you have to, in theory, retest all these vaccines and do, in a case where you have an effective vaccine, do trials on a whole bunch of people who are actually not going to get vaccinated because they're getting a placebo?
Right. I think that, last May, HHS had proposed or argued that yes, every vaccine should go through a randomized placebo-controlled trial, which is, to us, I think, obviously extremely problematic. And this was also referenced in Vinay Prasad's memo recently, right? That trials need to go through, randomized placebo-controlled trials, which makes innovation quite difficult and slows down research into vaccines that protect us against viruses, for instance, that are rapidly changing and evolving. So influenza, So basically, I think their argument is we need to raise the standard, but it's completely impractical. It's completely naive, and it would completely, thwart our ability to keep up with ongoing public health threats. Right.
Right. That to me is the important point, is that if you were actually to follow up on this and institute it, it strikes me that it would put a lot of people at risk.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And not to mention, the vaccine industry, right? And it would make it so much harder for especially for smaller companies to do R&D and to invest in these products when they're required to do these completely onerous studies that aren't really necessary. Does that make sense, Rich?
Yep.
Yeah. I think that's just an excuse to criticize the trials, just to say you need to do it. No, but there's no law that says you need to do saline. These lawyers cannot make up how to do a clinical trial.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Exactly.
I just looked up the the Pfizer COVID mRNA vaccine. They use saline as a control.
Yeah.
That's a vaccine that they've, thrown a lot of mud at, yet it should be pleasing to them that they used saline.
Well, Kennedy has said, that's one exception. But then when you look at the childhood vaccine schedule, that's no longer, universally recommended, right, for children. So.
The polio vaccine, IPV, was a saline-controlled trial as well.
Yeah. So as far as the polio trial goes, there's the 1955 Salk trial, right,
Right.
which used a vehicle that had a number of things that weren't just saline. So, but it was a massive trial, and it used a legitimate placebo. I mean, it compared 200,000 children to 200,000 children with who got the inactivated polio. I mean, you know that better than probably anybody, right?
Yeah, well, Salk actually didn't want a placebo. He thought it was unethical.
Right.
Because he said, my vaccine works. I know it. I don't want to. So he had to.
Right.
I think I'm not sure what they did to get around it. I forget now, but there was something they did. So RFK has also said, we don't know the safety profile of most childhood vaccines. So what do you say to that?
Yeah, I mean that's absolutely just ludicrous. So for one, and I think Aaron Siri was talking about that this morning. First of all, they try to sort of claim or presuppose that vaccine safety can only be monitored in a randomized controlled trial. Well, I mean that's completely naive. Randomized controlled trials are limited in terms of the length of follow up, the number of participants that you could possibly enroll in the trial, funding, et cetera. So there are a number of limitations to randomized controlled trials that will make it very unlikely to pick up extremely rare events, right? So when we're looking for 1 in a million or even rarer events, you can't rely on a randomized controlled trial. So that's where post-licensure monitoring comes in, and and it's ironic because they have this high standard for safety and efficacy, but then they use VAERS, for instance, when they want to claim that that the COVID vaccine killed 10 children. VAERS, the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, is a passive surveillance system. I mentioned this at the hearing, and Ron Johnson was like, "Oh, yeah, we've all heard that passive," but they still use it when they want to cherry pick, what suits their confirmation bias. But VAERS has certainly served an important function in terms of identifying early signals. It's an early warning system, like a smoke alarm. But there are a number of other ways in which we monitor safety, VSD, the FDA BEST program, a number of ways, observational studies, so, and I know this from the last several months, looking at these randomized controlled looking at the data for the systematic review for COVID, flu, and RSV vaccines. So we screened thousands of papers. I've got so many numbers in my head right now, but I want to say up to around 15,000 or so, and we screened a lot of the titles and stuff, and then abstracts, and then full text. But I looked through a lot of those myself. There was a massive amount of safety data that's been published. I mean, there's especially around COVID. It's overwhelming, really, how much has been published. Studies on whether or not the COVID vaccine is associated with alopecia, which is hair loss, or whether it triggers MS flares, and so much. There's so much out there that goes way beyond randomized controlled trials.
So I want to understand clearly. You mentioned post-licensure, surveillance or follow-up. Are there specific federal requirements for manufacturers or distributors to follow up post-licensure on a vaccine and report its safety profile?
I do believe, I'm not a regulator, Paul
Okay.
Offit would probably know, have a better answer for this, but I do believe that there are a number of requirements for ongoing safety monitoring after a clinical trial has been completed, but I don't want to be imprecise.
Whether or not it's
But that's a great question.
whether or not it's officially required, it certainly shows up.
Yeah.
And the COVID era is a great example of that because of the adenovirus vaccine that after licensure showed up with very rare side effects that were the thrombosis.
Right.
And ultimately was, I guess, withdrawn, right?
Right.
And of course, the mRNA vaccines and myocarditis that showed up in post-licensure, right?
Yep. Yeah. No. And intussusception with rotavirus vaccine. Yeah.
Right.
No. These systems work, and it's just so frustrating because they love to use VAERS to point out, how deadly the COVID vaccine is, but then on the other hand, they say that these safety monitoring systems are useless.
So you mentioned the 10 children dying from COVID vaccine that hit the news, and you mentioned that in the context of VAERS. Do you know actually what data they are citing and whether or not there's any legitimacy to that?
I do not. I don't know if anyone does. I've seen claims on social media that some of the ACIP members have seen the data and they're convinced. But you got to take that with a grain of salt. I mean, these people are extremely biased, and they're not they're not experts like Retzef Levy. So that memo was very alarming for a number of reasons, and I think that just beyond the claims of the deaths, that memo also included a number of very concerning things about the approach to vaccine research and framework. But I don't think that, to my knowledge, there's been any details revealed about those claims that are verifiable. So a lot of questions are, was there an independent review done? Was this peer reviewed, or was this just one person who went hunting for data through VAERS? Were these confirmed by autopsy? What were the case reports? The allegation is extraordinary, and as many of us have been saying, the evidence should also be, that's another irony. This whole administration is just fraught with hypocrisy because they really push for radical transparency, or they claim to, but this is completely opaque. So to answer your question, Rich, no, I don't know about those particular cases, but we deserve more information. And it's been a week now. It's been a week now.
Yeah. It's not just that you don't know. It hasn't, the data has not been revealed.
And the fact that they can say that 10 children died and with no data, exactly, which they're now scaring millions of people with absolutely no data to support it, is
just to clarify, if
criminal.
I understand it correctly, the way VAERS works is that you can report something within a certain period of time after a vaccination. So a kid gets vaccinated and 2 weeks later he dies. You don't necessarily know whether the death is a result of the vaccination. It takes a whole bunch more work to figure it out. And lots of times, if not most times, it turns out to be that the problem was not related to the vaccine. There are ways to figure that out. And those data or findings need to be revealed in this particular case and all cases.
Yeah, it's. I was really shocked when I saw that memo, and I mean, VAERS has been sort of, taken advantage of by anti-vaccine activists for a long time now, and but this is they've taken it to a whole nother level. I mean, it's you can't determine causality. You just can't,
Right.
with
Right.
VAERS alone, and there's selection bias because it relies on individuals to voluntarily submit reports, and so there's underreporting, there's reporting bias, there's inability to determine causality, there's subjectivity, and especially when there's no verification of these reports, it's and there's no denominator, so there's so many limitations. You could write a book about the limitations.
But who verifies the reports on VAERS? I'm not sure. Is this through other doctors, scientists? Are they physicians? Like, who are these people? Do they exist? Is it just, I don't know. I have no idea. I keep on reading that they're unverified reports and that, like you said, you can't have causality from that. And if all of this is based, if those 10 deaths are based on VAERS in a week, if they're going to come out saying that a child died, but they also had the COVID vaccine, that's not causation. So I'm not sure if we know how they verify these things.
Yeah, well, it is known. So once signals are identified through VAERS, then things are evaluated more closely through the Vaccine Safety Data Link, VSD, and a number of other, monitoring systems. Who exactly is responsible for that? It's the CDC and FDA. So then there's also PRISM, the Post-licensure rapid immunization safety monitoring system, and that scans a lot of insurance claims in near real time to confirm or to rule out some of these rare safety signals. So so these I mean, that's how a lot of these important adverse events, rare adverse events, have been detected and acted upon. So and that's why if there had been COVID vaccine associated deaths that were if there was a signal in VAERS, that should have been evaluated based on this infrastructure that we have, and they've been working on this for months. So why didn't they go through these proper channels and assure people that that's what they did, and be able to share verifiable evidence?
Well, I mean, if you read the document by Prasad, it's just unhinged, right? He concludes, he says the FDA is going to admit that COVID vaccines killed 10 kids and doesn't give any information. This is supposed to be a more transparent FDA, right? That's not transparent. Right. And then he says we're going to revise all the vaccine testing requirements because obviously people are overlooking things and the trials are not good enough and blah, blah, blah. And he says at the end, which I find the most crazy, he says we should have an internal dialogue with this at FDA. But if you don't agree, you should resign.
Yeah.
Can you believe that?
No, it's unbelievable. Yeah.
I mean, that's not a person who knows how to be an administrator.
Right.
That's what kills me.
Yeah, and then the path forward that was outlined in the memo, the elimination of surrogate endpoints, this idea that they would stop granting marketing authorization based on immunogenicity data, like antibody levels, for most new products. I mean, that would have a disastrous impact on high risk populations, pregnant people, immunocompromised people, children, et cetera. So, I mean, it's just, the ramifications, if any of that approach is realized, if any of his framework is put into effect, the ramifications are just disastrous. I mean, look at influenza alone. Just reevaluating the influenza standards. He described the current annual flu shot framework as a quote evidence-based catastrophe, and that we need randomized controlled trials with clinical endpoints like prevention of symptomatic disease for strain updates. That's just. I mean, any influenza vaccinologist would know that this is just absolutely insane, right? For lack of a better
you can't
word.
do it. You'd never have a vaccine every
Right,
year, right?
Right.
All right. Another topic that you've written about is RFK claims that kids get 92 mandatory shots, and that's too much. So, what can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So, boy, this is a good one. And I'll just say that a lot of the reason why what he says is so convincing and sort of powerful is because it's just this sort of maelstrom of stats that he says with total confidence, and so there's this. There's this expression, gish gallop, where someone just kind of overwhelms you with information, right? And so it can be hard to refute, and refuting RFK Jr. can be honestly a full-time job, and some of it is harder than others. This I thought was kind of a softball. Excuse me. So. When I saw that, I saw this one clip on the news of him saying, 92 vaccines, or kids get 92, and that they're mandated. I mean, I'm a parent. I've got 2 kids. I know that's absolutely bonkers. And so I looked at it based on the CDC vaccine schedule. First of all, ACIP doesn't mandate vaccines, right? The states do, and the maximum is like 30 to 32 vaccines that are mandated. It varies a lot, right? I mean, look at Florida, but other states, I think the max is 30 to 32. But in terms of the recommended vaccines, based on the CDC schedule, it's 50 to 54, and that includes annual flu shots. That's up to age 18.
So that's not 50 different pathogens. That's injections, maybe
doses.
Multiple for the same exact. Okay, it's doses.
Yeah,
just to be clear, it's not 50 different things.
No, that's right.
Yeah.
Okay. So the CDC childhood vaccine schedule protects against 16 diseases with 50 to 54 doses during the first 18 years. I personally don't find that to be concerning. It's certainly not 92, and sometimes he says 72. He is all over the place. But despite more doses, and this is something that I wrote about based on, I want to give a shout out to Paul Offit, one of my heroes. Paul had done a study looking at, and this was in Plotkin's Vaccines, the textbook. He had done a study, he could tell you more about this, that looked at the number of antigens over the years contained in or included in childhood vaccines. So RFK Jr. has this sort of nostalgia, right, for back in the day when he had, 2 vaccines or whatever. But he recently, has been comparing the schedule to 1986 for some reason. I don't know why. But in the 1980s, we protected against far fewer diseases, but the antigen load was much higher. It's 3,000 or so. Part of that's because they used wholesale pertussis, right? But the total antigen load in the 54 doses that we give now is around 165. So 95% less or lower antigen load. So if the concern is the immune system's being overwhelmed by all these antigens, then that's clearly wrong. Or if the concern is that they're exposed to more adjuvants, well, we've got a lot of data that shows that that's not a safety issue.
I don't see where this whole idea. I mean, it seems to me that the notion that you could overwhelm the immune system or something like that just comes out of thin air. I mean, we're being bombarded with antigens all the time, every day.
Yeah.
That's what the immune system is for, right?
Right.
The seems to me that the vaccinations are a trivial contribution to the job that the immune system has to do.
100%.
Also, overwhelming antigens. Talk to your gut microbiome. It's like billions of antigens just hanging out within your body.
Yeah. I have to say, I have really enjoyed Vincent's lectures on virology that I shared with my parents who live in Europe. They loved it too. And I think one of your opening points, right, was about the number of viruses that we're exposed to on a regular basis. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So
tons.
Yeah. So Rich, no, it's a great point. And so, and some of the slides that Aaron Siri had shown this morning, have this picture of a baby with, surrounded by syringes, poking the kid. These are spaced out over time, and the immune stimulation is a drop in the bucket compared to what we're exposed to on a regular basis. I mean, when my kids were in preschool, they were exposed to so much more than the entirety of the childhood vaccine schedule in terms of antigens.
And we can't lose sight of the fact it's very easy, seems to me, in these sorts of presentations to scare people with stuff like needles and immune system being overwhelmed, and the fact that these immunizations prevent them from getting potentially lethal or really lousy diseases is overlooked. These vaccines work, and they're there for a reason.
Yeah. Well, when they decided to cut $500 million worth in mRNA research, right? They claimed that the HHS memo at least claimed that part of the rationale was that the vaccines don't work, right? And they said that COVID vaccines in particular don't work because they don't prevent infection, which is got to be one of the biggest pet peeves of the past 5 years for me, as Vincent knows, right? This idea of conflating infection and disease, or blurring the two, right? So it's completely naive to assume that respiratory virus vaccines should be expected to provide sterilizing immunity or block, respiratory viruses from causing infection. And I have to say, and we talked about this last time 3 years ago, that the messaging around this, nuance had not been great during COVID, right? I think that the effectiveness of the vaccines in terms of preventing infection and transmission, et cetera, was overpromised. And I don't fault anyone. I mean, it was a rapidly evolving situation. Science communication is very difficult, right? And this is nuanced stuff, and a lot of people don't have a background in science. And I can relate to that because I was a literature major in college, and so this is confusing stuff, but it's the implications, the consequences have been disastrous, right? So, the idea that the COVID vaccines didn't work because you could still get COVID after the COVID shot is terribly frustrating and sad and disappointing. But the reality is that they've worked extremely well to do what they were, in my mind, intended to do, and that's prevent severe disease and keep people out of the ICU and out of the morgue, as Paul Offit says. And I want to give Paul another shout out because he was very good about emphasizing this important point early on, right?
They claim that So we would say COVID vaccines prevented so many millions of deaths, right? And then they will say those numbers are all fabricated. So that's a typical response of this group that, well, what you're saying is wrong. And it's really hard to fight that, right?
Well, one thing I realized during this awful experience I had at a Senate hearing was that they're not interested in the truth, and they'll never be satisfied with any sort of evidence-based claim. I mean, I was asked, from my experience as a clinician, and as we talked about last time, I was on the front line during COVID, and I saw a dramatic shift in the number of people dying from COVID once the vaccines had been rolled out. It was undeniable, and all of my colleagues have said the same thing. And there have been, and sure, some of these modeling studies in terms of how many deaths were prevented by COVID vaccines are not going to be precise. Right. But it's undeniable that the COVID vaccines prevented millions of deaths. Right. I mean, there's a Stanford epidemiologist who has typically been very well respected and regarded even amongst more conservative folks who his study showed that COVID vaccines prevented at least 2 million deaths worldwide. I think it was probably more, but imprecise estimates. Nevertheless, the COVID vaccines clearly prevented a lot of death and morbidity. And I mean, don't just take my word for it. It's clear. I mean, there was a CDC study based on the Delta wave that showed that vaccinated people were 53 times less likely to die from COVID. I mean, so in my mind, it's crystal clear. On the other hand, when I was trying to make some of these points during the hearing, they said, well, actually, the COVID vaccine has killed more people than COVID. Yeah, I couldn't believe it. But someone said, yeah, the COVID vaccine has killed 17 million people. I mean, it's utterly bonkers.
I think it also comes back to at the beginning of the pandemic, like you said, certain scientists, I think, overpromised or overstated certain things, which was very unfortunate because I think a lot of it was from pressure from public because they didn't want to seem like they didn't know. But that's also part of, like you said, science communication, where we have to explain what the scientific method is. And that if we say something today and we say something else next week, it's not that we lied, it's that it's ever evolving and we're learning more. And I think that's something that we have to continue to remind the public. It's not the scientists are lying. Last week they said one thing, now they're saying something else. It's that. And yes, we shouldn't be very definitive because sometimes scientists were a little bit definitive with, transmission and infection and things like that. And we have to be clear on very, very clear to the public what that means, or else they're not going to trust us, like what happened with the COVID pandemic. So hopefully we learned from this to not do it in the future, because unfortunately there will be other outbreaks and there will be other, I don't want to say pandemics, hopefully not, but we'll see.
There will be.
So hopefully it was a learning process.
I remember during the pandemic through TWiV, going through my own evolution in understanding how the vaccine worked and what it did. Because I think I started out with the expectation that it would confer something akin to sterilizing immunity, having never really thought a whole lot about the difference between sterilizing immunity and just, say, protective immunity in terms of protection against severe disease. And then we started seeing people who had been vaccinated getting COVID. And we spent a lot of time talking about that.
Yeah, I remember.
What does this mean? And there was an evolution of thought and an evolution of the science. And it turned out that, the vaccines, and in fact, this was the end point of the trials.
Right.
Not that they confer sterilizing immunity, but that they prevent severe disease. And nobody ever said anything about preventing infection. It came to me as a surprise, but on thinking about it, okay, it doesn't mean they're not working. It just means you have to think about it a little differently.
Yeah, and I was an avid listener, still am, but on my way to work during the pandemic, I would listen to you guys on a regular basis, and my thinking evolved with you in many ways. The initial trial data was extremely encouraging, right? And And I think that there was understandably an incentive or desire to convince people to get vaccinated.
Mhm.
And, and I think some of that ended up being, exaggerate, or not exaggerated, but a lot of the nuance wasn't there. But things also evolved, and the virus underwent a number of mutations. So things changed a lot. And so, yeah, anyway.
So on Twitter, Trump declared some weeks ago that MMR vaccine needs to be split up. He just feels that that's the right thing to do. So can you talk a little bit about what that effect would have, or if it's even possible?
Yeah, and I had talked about this. Maybe I tweeted about it, but for one, the monovalent, single vaccines don't exist. So it would be a tall order to get single measles vaccine, single mumps, single rubella vaccine available. It would take a long time, and it would probably lead to a reduction in vaccine uptake because it would require more visits, more sticks. I mean, so here's another example of sort of the irony. I mean, they're on the one hand, they're saying that kids get too many shots, right? And now they're saying, let's break up the combo shot into more shots, because Trump feels like it's the right thing to do. But and just like with the vote this morning on changing the universal Hep B birth dose recommendation, it wasn't based on any evidence or even any signal of safety concerns. And there's a massive amount of data. Some of my colleagues at CIDRAP just did an extensive review of over 400 studies published over 40 years that showed no benefit to delaying the Hep B birth dose. But they went ahead and did away with it anyway for no reason other than vibes or discomfort and their guts, just like Trump wanting to break up the MMR vaccine. It's not based on any scientific rationale, and it's completely impractical.
They said that if you're pregnant and you test positive, then your baby can get the vaccine. But if you test negative, you cannot get it. But that assumes that all the transmission is from the mother, right?
Well, it assumes a lot. It assumes that we have a perfect system, and we don't. And the data are very clear that and during the September ACIP meeting, there was a CDC presentation. The slides, I think, are really informative, and one of the slides mentioned the story, and I think stories can be really powerful. The story is that in Michigan in 1999. There was an infant who, at 3 months old, died from hepatitis B associated liver failure. And the mother had tested positive initially during her prenatal screening. And then she had 10 total visits. And at delivery, the record said that she was hepatitis B negative, despite this prior positive. So that result wasn't acted upon. The kid got vaccinated at 2.5 months old and died at 3 months old. And data have shown that that's not that uncommon, or it hadn't been. There have been hundreds of other similar cases. So there's so many reasons why it's imperative that the universal Hep B birth dose be recommended here, but it's no longer the case. But I'm going to continue to recommend it.
Right. Well, so some states will continue to recommend it, right? Like the West Coast
Health Alliance
Coalition, the East Coast Coalition, and maybe some others as well, right?
Yeah.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that when the Hep B vaccine first came out, that the recommendations for using it were similar to these. That is, you use it on people who either their HBV status is unknown or who test positive, rather than the universal vaccination. And the data out the other end said that wasn't effective. because it wasn't catching everybody.
Right.
And so they went to the universal, whether or not you're HPV positive, and it had a dramatic effect on the incidence of HPV. Have I got that story right?
That is right. Yeah, in 1991, it was universally recommended. And if you look at the slides, and I've posted about this, there's a really powerful graph that it's color coded. Kids age 0 to 9 or so, from 2008 to 2023. This is CDC surveillance data. 0 cases of acute hepatitis B in those kids. And that was, I think, thanks to the universal Hep B birth dose recommendation. Because before that, a number of kids were getting infected. And, when it comes to a vaccine preventable illness and vaccine preventable cancer and death in the case of hepatitis B, one case is too many, If we can prevent 100% or 100% of these, we should. I mean, these are tragic. I just saw a patient just a few weeks ago, middle-aged person with 3 kids, who's dying from hepatitis B. He's got liver cancer that was acquired at birth, and. If that person had been vaccinated at birth, his kids wouldn't be, about to lose their dad. So, every single one of these cases is tragic.
And this vaccine is absolutely safe. There's no downside.
Right.
These recommendations are going to cause harm.
Undoubtedly.
People are going to get sick and die.
Undoubtedly. The kids are going to become infected with hepatitis B and die prematurely. 1 in 4 kids who are born with hepatitis B die prematurely. And 85% of kids who are born to an infected mother develop hepatitis B, and 90% of those develop chronic infection, which is much different from adults. Adults tend to clear it much more frequently, and 95% of the time. So this policy change for absolutely no evidence-based reason will undoubtedly kill people, kill children, and cause preventable cancer. 100%.
And it's so tragic because we've spoken about this in the past with other things, like with polio in the United States and vaccination rates, and that hopefully no children die, but some children will die. And when the number gets high enough, maybe they'll change the policy again. But it's so tragic that that's going to have to happen, because in no world for the next 20 years, you'll see hundreds of children dying every year, and they're just not going to reinstate the vaccination. That would be crazy. So it's very tragic that, like polio, children are going to have to get infected. There's cases of polio now. There's going to be cases of Hep B and like neonates dying. And then the mothers are going to say, the doctors are going to say, it's not part of the vaccination anymore. And then they're going to be like, but you could have saved my child. And it's just so much unnecessary pain. And they're basing so much. Now they're saying that now it's not evidence-based. We have evidence that it works. But then they're harping on before what we were talking about of the vaccine hesitancy and all of these clinical studies, all the clinical trials that don't have the right placebo controls, and they want all of this evidence that nobody can show them, although we are showing it to them. But it's completely contradictory, because now they're not making decisions based on evidence. So everything that they're doing is completely contradictory. It makes absolutely no sense, and it's extremely frustrating.
Yeah, it's so heartbreaking. I completely agree. And these ramifications are going to be felt for, I would say, beyond 20 years. And not just in terms of vaccine preventable illness and death, but confidence in vaccines, confidence in doctors, confidence in public health, confidence in science.
Exactly.
It's mind-blowing and disorienting to realize kind of where we are. One thing I realized during this Senate hearing is that people like me are viewed as a public enemy. After the hearing, I got just a barrage of harassment online, whatever. But also, emails with vile, threatening emails. And I think that a lot of scientists have been afraid to speak out, and so the ramifications are just massive, massive, and it's going to take a very long time to reverse this.
Mhm.
But I just want to emphasize what Rich said about the Hep B thing, but with the MMRV versus MMR, there was at least this increased risk of seizure with MMRV, but with this, there's no safety signal. There's no new data.
So I think this decision is unethical because it's just like withholding standard of care in a clinical trial. You are now, we know this Hep B vaccine works at birth. You're withholding it, and that it's unethical. And this committee should be sued.
I was wondering about that. When some unvaccinated kid shows up with chronic HPV infection.
Yep.
Can we sue the people who made the recommendation?
Yeah,
exactly, because the parents are going to want to sue the doctor, which is obviously not their fault. But it'll go back to the recommendation, and that's going to happen. Obviously, it's going to happen.
You should get a vaccine law professor on your show. I've got a few contacts. Yeah, I don't know about the sort of legal reality. But the other thing is these were never mandated, right? I mean, someone replied to one of my posts yesterday saying that the Hep B recommendation was mandated, and I was like, no, it's a recommendation, right? It was a universal recommendation, meaning every demographic should be recommended to get this birth dose. You can decline, so.
Well, hopefully you have a conversation with your physician, right? And they can say, why don't you want this? Because these are the consequences. I mean, that's a good conversation to have. Yeah. And I mean, going forward, most likely the medical societies are going to recommend vaccine the way it was. Right?
Yeah, I think they are. Yeah.
So essentially, ACIP and CDC are irrelevant now. They have no expertise. And I don't even trust that if there is an increase in Hep B in kids, that they're going to report it.
Yeah.
Well, this is the thing. If VAERS is now going to be monitored by the FDA and CDC, and we don't trust the people there, and they're not being transparent, then it also means nothing now. So how are we going to monitor any of these adverse reactions, or are we going to believe them, and where can we actually find data that's credible now?
Yeah, I think it even goes beyond that. They're not only irrelevant, they're reckless and dangerous. They've already done a lot of damage. Even if they didn't make this vote, because they kept delaying it, right? Because they didn't know what they were voting on. I mean, it was a circus. They didn't know what they were voting on in September. They didn't know what they were voting on yesterday. So they finally voted today. But even had they not voted on, doing away with this universal Hep B birth dose, they had already done so much damage with, all the confusion and the damage done to the public's confidence in public health and vaccines.
Do we know what they're going to be voting on in the future?
Well, they post their agendas in advance, so yeah, without a lot of notice, but yeah, it's not always clear, and they change things up all the time. So who knows? I think they're pretty unpredictable, but it's pretty outrageous that they got Aaron Siri to present at ACIP today. I mean, he's a vaccine litigator and anti-vaccine activist, but
it's absurd. It's totally absurd. But the whole committee is unqualified, right? More or less.
Beyond unqualified. I mean, they're actively, opposed, and they're science denialists. I mean, they deny that COVID was deadly. They deny that the COVID vaccines were effective. So they're not only, and I don't mean to say that about every single ACIP member. I have to say, Cody Meisner, I think, has done a good job at, standing up for some of the truth. And I'm not making any personal attacks, but yeah, it goes beyond just sort of incompetent, unqualified. It's actively, threatening our public health and the safety of Americans. It's an existential threat, really.
I don't get why they have to make personal threats, right? That's their modus, because they have nothing else to say, so they threaten you personally, right? They insult you and do all that. I'm sure you had that happen at your hearing.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I had to be escorted out by Capitol Police. There was a lot of tension, and part of that was because I had, I had sat through over 2 hours of this. This just awful experience, left kind of hanging, pretty unprepared. I was invited 4 days beforehand and was kind of assured that it wasn't going to be a debate. And, I thought I'd kind of say my part and that'd be it. But no, it was awful, but I had to be escorted out. And there was even some hostility, and some of that was because I had called out Robert Malone for posting something on X. He said, we all know that Anthony Fauci is in Siena, Italy, but where in the world is Rochelle Walensky? Inquiring minds want to know. And he's got 1 million followers, and he posts a number of things about, images of guns and stuff. And this was, weeks after the CDC got shut up, and someone had been killed. And so I called that out and said, can we at least, make sure that we aren't, advocating for violence or harassment or mobs. And and they threw it right back at me and said, "Well, you're the one who's advocating for violence with the vaccines that are killing 17 million people." But no, I mean, I just saw something today where Malone posted something threatening about Paul Offit. I mean, he said winter is coming for Paul Offit and his ilk. What does that mean? And why is an ACIP member posting that? It's absolutely insane, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally inappropriate.
I mean, it's comparable to the garbage that Trump also posts. So if our president is doing it, then I guess
he's influencing everyone for sure.
Yes, it's terrible.
So you also wrote about this Henry Ford Health Systems analysis, which said that vaccinated children have higher rates of chronic conditions than unvaccinated. What's wrong with that study?
Well, detection bias for one, right? So the vaccinated children had 7 times more healthcare visits per year than the unvaccinated children. So, when you see a doctor more often, you get diagnosed more often, right? And that's ascertainment bias, not, vaccine injury. I mean, there are a lot of issues with this study, and that's why Henry Ford came out with a statement. Henry Ford Health came out with a statement saying that this never should have been published, and it wasn't, because it didn't come close to meeting, scientific standards. But the other thing was that, most of the kids had only been followed to a very young age before certain chronic conditions could possibly be diagnosed, like ADHD or autism. And there was even they had some data that reported that the unvaccinated kids had 0 cases of ADHD, and epidemiological data would indicate that would be very unlikely, right? So, I mean, the study was just fraught with bias. I would encourage you to read the piece by Jeffrey Morris in The Conversation. He's the director of biostats at Penn. He did a brilliant analysis of it, which is also, I think, a great way to better understand types of bias in these kinds of observational studies. I wrote a Substack and a piece in Stat about it as well. But the other thing about that study is that the study found no association between vaccination and autism. Yet they continue to say, on the one hand, they say that this is the most important vaccine study ever. I mean, they made a documentary film about it. But on the other hand, they say vaccines cause autism, but their most beloved study didn't show that. So, the hazard ratio, I think, was like 0.6. which would trend toward, protection. Obviously, vaccines don't. I mean, I would say it's probably obvious that vaccines don't protect against autism, but that study clearly didn't show any association between vaccines and autism.
So the fact that it wasn't published, the other side uses that as an argument to say you're suppressing good data when in fact it wasn't published because it's crap.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's what the whole hearing was about. And I was shown that study, a couple days before the hearing, and I thought, oh, okay, well, I'll at least be able to focus on this and the limitations of this. But it didn't matter what I said, and then they said, well, the researchers accounted for all that with this sensitivity analysis. Well, the sensitivity analysis did not account for any of that. It even made things worse in some ways. Jeffrey Morris gets into that, but yeah, the study was completely uninterpretable. I'll put it mildly.
And it was never published. It was an in-house thing that the Ford system itself said, this is crap and should never see the light of day, and was drug up 5 years later by somebody who wanted to make an anti-vax film. So it's all nonsense.
Yep. And I think that they, that just goes to show just how sort of there's no shame, in this group. I mean, they're showing this documentary trailer at a Senate hearing, and if they really cared about the quality of the evidence, they would, have someone like Jeffrey Morris review it and say, no, this is not good quality, but they don't care, and they went and made a documentary film about it. Apparently it won some award at a festival. But the idea that, we're taking up time at a Senate hearing with this as the star witness, it's just mind-blowing, right?
Yep. Well, I heard Peter Daszak talk. Probably you know of him, right? And he said, if you ever get, and he said, you scientists it's going to happen to you. You're going to get called to testify before Congress. You better get a lawyer because it's a whole different ballgame. I don't think you had a lawyer.
I was so naive. Yeah, I was so naive. And I was so busy working on these 2 vaccine review projects. I mean, the one that was published in the New England Journal, that took a massive amount of my time. But yeah, I was contacted by Senator Blumenthal's office, and at first I thought, well, I'm not a regulator. You should get Paul off it. And I'm sure Paul's smart. I'm sure he declined. But in very short notice, and I thought, I'm always down for kind of a different experience, and I'm kind of a risk taker. I used to surf big waves and stuff, and just kind of thought, sure, it'll be an interesting experience, and maybe I can serve my country is what I told myself. And my dad said he'd be proud of me. And so I was like, okay, I'll do it. Everyone I talked to afterwards who had experience with this sort of thing said, I wish you had called me. I would have told you not to do that. Right beforehand, I had reached out to a Stanford vaccine law professor, and she's like, you were walking into a snake pit. And I was like, what, really? I had no idea. And people were like, oh, you should at least watch some videos of hearings with Aaron Siri and know what you're getting into. And I was like, I don't want to psych myself out. I'm just going to kind of stick to the evidence. And I thought, well, I'm the only one in the hearing who's a physician and have, frontline experience. That'll be respected, And, the other thing is that I was not, during the pandemic, I was not, this like rabid sort of vaccine cheerleader, right? I like to think that I had sort of a more nuanced take, which is partly why a lot of my followers over the years had been, sort of farther to the right on the vaccine hesitancy spectrum than me. I had called out, like Paul Offit had, the lack of evidence to support universal boosters, especially before primary series had been provided globally, so, and I wasn't a staunch advocate of masking kids, nonstop, but when I showed up, they just saw me as the embodiment of everything that was wrong with the COVID response. And I became a punching bag, and then publicly ridiculed and shamed and harassed, and so if anyone had asked me in the future, or if anyone does ask me in the future, hey, should I testify at this hearing? I'm a vaccinologist. I regret having done that. I would say at least have a lot of time to prepare, get a lawyer, or don't do it.
Was that a bipartisan committee?
Well, boy. So, so it's chaired by Ron Johnson. And going back to the whole BARDA thing, Ron Johnson wrote the foreword for this book, Toxic Shot. And the packet of information that was the basis for scrapping $500 million worth of mRNA research funds was based on this bibliography, and Ron Johnson was involved with that, or at least he wrote the foreword. He's a very extreme anti-vaccine activist. He chaired the hearing, and Senator Blumenthal was the ranking member. He was the only Democrat that showed up. And he was gone most of the time because he had to go to this other hearing where they were voting. So it was basically, me against the Republicans and Aaron Siri and Toby Rogers, who's also an extreme anti-vaccine activist and science denialist.
The thing that keeps in this conversation showing up again and again and again is the word nuance.
Yeah.
And that's really important because all of this stuff is cast in black and white terms, and none of it is black and white. And that's why it's hard to be a scientist and talk in these environments, because we're all about nuance. I'm all about, I don't know.
Yeah.
And I'm learning, and it's a work in progress. But that doesn't fly when a lot of people want a black and white answer. And this is why we have to try and somehow communicate critical thinking. You got to work it out for yourself.
100%. And that's one thing I loved about my literature training in college was, help me think critically. And I agree 100%. Rich, the other thing I'll say, though, is that they've got their own branch of science, in quotes, pseudoscience, that they know extremely well, and that makes it difficult to debate them too, because a lot of it, I felt during the hearing was just trap after trap, like, how can you deny that the mRNA doesn't go to the brain because this paper showed that it does? Well, who has time to research all of the sort of legitimate science, based on clinical science, et cetera, and then go into the weeds of this, this 181-page packet that HHS posted, where, they reference, rat studies where rats were literally injected with high doses of mRNA into, like, sometimes directly into the brain. And so it makes it extremely difficult to debate in good faith when, a lot of it from their standpoint, I don't think is in good faith.
Right.
And they're just naming off studies that you don't necessarily know if, because I saw part of the hearing at least, and they don't say if it's in human, if it's in animals, if it's not. It just says mRNA can be all across the body and it can be toxic to cells and whatever. Okay, if it's in a mouse, it's not necessarily translational to humans anyway. So this is why we have clinical study. But anyway, it was very unclear.
You know what? When you get a tattoo, it goes to your lymph nodes forever.
That's a new paper. I saw that.
People don't seem to care about that. And someone said the other day that in her town, most of the anti-vaxxers are tattooed. So this doesn't make any sense, but we didn't expect it to make sense. Right? That's the problem.
Yeah.
Now, Jake, how do we get ourselves out of this mess?
I think we have to all just, I mean, it sounds corny, but all, stand up together. It's extremely daunting, extremely disorienting, it's exhausting. But I think we all need to do what we can, whether it's writing op-eds, getting more involved. I don't know. The other thing with the hearing, beforehand, Siri had posted to his, thousands and thousands of followers on X, hey, come to this hearing, and so they packed the room, and so they are a force, and they're very well organized, very well funded. They're passionate, they live and breathe the science in quotes. It's a formidable task, but we can't give up because the stakes are so high. I mean, we're talking about vaccines, right? And vaccines affect literally every single type of human being, right? We're not talking about some rare melanoma drug. We're talking about drugs that are medicines that help prevent suffering, morbidity, and mortality from birth until death, right? I mean,
especially in children, because they don't have a choice.
Right.
They're vulnerable. They're the most vulnerable. They don't
Right.
make decisions. Their parents have to, which is tragic.
Yeah, and immunocompromised populations and marginalized populations. I mean, the Hep B birth dose, that the effect of the fallout from that policy will largely be on, under-resourced and marginalized folks, So, yeah, my point is the stakes, in my mind, could not be higher. I mean, climate change sure is a big deal, but the stakes are very high. And so we just need to all really stick together and work harder. We can't be complacent. I don't know. What do you think, Vincent? Or anyone else?
Well, I think that we have to get the message out there because most people don't care about much of this. Many people don't. Most people vote on the economy and that's it. They don't care about NIH funding. They don't care about CDC. It's just a few that do. So I think we have to get the word out. We're trying to do that here. But I also think other scientists need to speak up. Many academicians are afraid to talk.
Yeah.
Right?
But
it's
for
normal.
good reason.
Like,
I mean, if NIH funding is important, and so, I've spoken to a number of friends and colleagues who work in healthcare who won't speak up because they are afraid of the real world impact in terms of, not being able to fund their lab, and that's happening. So I don't want to minimize the challenge. The challenge is huge, but I kind of disagree, Vincent. I do think I wouldn't say people don't care. I don't think it's clear to people what the ramifications are, in terms of, with the cutting of mRNA funding, right? I mean, we're talking about research that could help prevent norovirus. I mean, who doesn't want to prevent norovirus? I mean, I'm a parent of 2 kids. I've gone through norovirus multiple times. My kid got norovirus on a transatlantic flight, and it was a nightmare. Who doesn't want a norovirus vaccine? And, so... or cancer research, So I think people would care if it were clearer, and if the information was more sort of broadly, put out there and accessible.
Hey, I understand what you're saying. We try.
No, you're doing an amazing job and very important work.
But that's our contribution on these podcasts, and we remind people, but we don't reach a lot of people who need to hear us, right? That's the problem.
Right, but you're doing a very important
work. I think we reach some people though. Some people, and even within all of our outside of TWiV, even like yourself in the hospital or anyone, or Vincent, when you speak to people on the street, like as a scientist, I think that so many of us are introverted. I mean, I don't include myself, but many scientists are, so it's very difficult for them, and doctors as well. Doctors not so much, but But everybody's afraid of getting judged. But maybe we can just start communicating, I think, just how science works, what science is, so then other people can they can make their own decision about what's going on. If they understand how the scientific method works, how it's ever evolving, we're not lying, I think just that would help clarify a lot of the misinformation and like trust issues that people have. So
I will also add, as problematic as X is, or Twitter, I think it's very important that more people speak out on X. I mean, the harassment can be awful. I've experienced a number of pile-ons, and it's terrible.
Yep.
But I talked to Peter Hotez about it, and he gave me some great tips, and things have gotten a lot better since then. I block a lot more people now. But I do think it's an important platform because it's stacked against us because, the anti-vaccine activists are very effective on X. So I think more and more people need to push back. But I think since the beginning of the pandemic, I think, and since Elon Musk took over X or Twitter, I think a lot of important voices have dropped off, and that's unfortunate. So that's one idea.
Yeah.
We need more protest songs.
Yeah.
I'm only half joking here. I'm thinking about what my exposure to the universe is. Okay, so I do TWiV. Good. I'm glad I can do that. But most of the people I talk to are people who are like-minded individuals.
Mm-hmm.
My broadest exposure, in fact, is singing.
Mm.
I go out in the community and I sing. Okay, so I ought to have a couple of a couple of pro-vaccination songs. Okay,
Yeah.
or something like that. But that gets me thinking. Music and protest music is a very effective way to get a message out. So unfortunately, I'm not the guy to do that. But maybe there are people out there.
Some famous singers.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point. I mean, Americans pay a lot of attention to famous musicians, and they've got massive followings, not just on social media, but no, I think that's a very important point. I think it would be great to get more celebrities involved, to speak out.
Yep.
Celebrities
are revered.
What's that?
Let's have a song on
Celebrities are revered.
Yeah, totally.
We need a song on critical thinking. I wonder how that will go.
Yeah, a Taylor Swift song on critical thinking, for sure.
Taylor Swift.
If you're out there, Taylor Swift, please help us out.
I'm sure she's listening.
I'm sure she's an avid TWiV fan.
Yeah,
of course.
It was.
All right, Jake Scott, Stanford University. Thank you for joining us, Jake. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jake.
Always so fun. Take care.
Let's do some picks, okay?
Okay.
Let's do it.
That's very depressing,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, a little bit.
Little,
but we're
just a
here.
little?
We're here and we're trying to make it better. We're trying to improve by interviewing Dr. Scott and also us by discussing all of this and all of our listeners that then they can propagate the message, ideally, because our listeners are great. So we know that they'll do that.
Okay.
Do you want me to start?
Angela,
Vincent?
what do you have for us?
So this week, actually, an artist, her name is Angela Palmer, also Angela. She came to McGill to give a talk on art, but she's an artist that kind of combines art and science. And we had an exhibition at our building, like at the university, called Art Meets Science. And so you can click on her website. It's just angelaspalmer.com with an S. And if anyone has ever seen this, I'm not sure if they've seen it, but so I think it's in Edinburgh right now, but she made during the pandemic, it was in 2020, this, she calls it the COVID particle. So SARS-CoV-2, it's a virion. And if you go to her website, you can see it. And it's called The Sphere That Changed the World. And so basically what she does is the way that she does, she meets with scientists. So she'll have an idea, right? And really, and in this case, it was about disease agents, so different pathogens. And she met with scientists to get basically the renderings of the actual virion itself, and then they sent her like sketches of it, which then she etched into glass So what you're seeing, if you go to her website currently on her like opening page, if you scroll down, you can see a lot of them are etched in glass. So she has, I'm not sure how many sheets this one is, but I think it's about 50 sheets of glass where each of them has like etching. She uses like electronic like little drill, and she'll etch into it. And then on each sheet of glass, there'll be different etchings. And then you put them all together and it creates this like beautiful 3D motion. It has like this beautiful motion to it. She has it in like light green and blue. I thought that the coronavirus, the SARS-CoV-2 particle was beautiful, but she also has like a dodo because her new exhibition is going to be on endangered species. And she has one of a brain. It's actually her own brain. So she etched in glass after doing an MRI of her own brain tissue. So I just think that it was a really beautiful experience to meet with her. She inspired all of us to be a little bit more creative in our science. And we did an exhibition where there was 50 different students at McGill that sent artwork. So this was very open to everyone's interpretation. So it was, science meets art. And some people just sent imaging, like microscopy photos. Other people made collages, like Andy Warhol style. Other people did audio, different like of sound waves of the brain. And we had this whole exhibition and it was really, really interesting. And there should be photos eventually. We don't have any yet, but if we get them, maybe I'll link them next time. But yes, Angela Palmer, you should go check her out. Her work is beautiful.
I'm checking out her website. It's awesome.
She gave an ethanol seminar.
Yes, the ETOH, exactly. Yes.
Remember that.
Just like you, Vincent. Yes, she did. It was beautiful.
Yeah, the virus particle is very pretty.
Isn't it so cool?
Yep. Very nice.
Yeah. So
Rich, what do you have for us?
So I have some episode appropriate picks. These have been out there for a while, but I thought this would be a good time to highlight them. Thanks to TWiV for making this happen. I've been pretty upset about the hepatitis B thing because people are going to die. And I'm influenced by the experience that I had last year, whenever, I don't know when it was, Vincent, when you sent me to the hepatitis B virus meeting in Chicago. And we did a TWiV with you remote and me there. And then as a satellite function, I did a couple of interviews with individuals. One was Thomas Tu, who is a hepatitis B researcher, but importantly is also a chronically infected with hepatitis B. And so he has his own personal story. Another interview I did was with Sherry Cohen, who is the president of the Hepatitis B Foundation. And you will see in many of these articles surrounding this ACIP meeting, she is quoted in the articles. So she's extremely knowledgeable about the field. And so we recorded those episodes. Those interviews. They're 25 minutes each, and I've linked both of them here. I'll tell you, I had not looked at them since I recorded them, but I looked at them last night. The interview with Thomas, too, had me in tears.
Oh.
His experience is quite something, and it's a compelling story. And Sherry has a compelling story as well. We've talked many times before about how stories are in this day and age are often more compelling than data. So you want a story? Look at these. These are stories.
Cool. Right. So next week, I'm going to Germany for a giant virus meeting, Rich.
Cool.
And I was just
say hi to everybody.
I was looking through YouTube and I found this channel. It's Sophia, the flight attendant's official channel, and she gives travel advice. So I listened to one video. It's called TSA is checking seniors' phones for these 5 apps. So I had to listen to that. I don't have any of the 5 apps. But this whole idea about law enforcement, taking your phone, I've been very interested in that lately. I watched another video where it was a lawyer. He said, basically, if you're stopped and the police ask you for your phone, you don't have to give it to them. You can say, I don't consent to searches.
Oh, really?
That's it. He said, I don't consent to searches. And they need to get a warrant to see your phone.
So what
lawyer also... But
So what are the apps that I can't have?
I don't know. You have to look at it.
Okay.
I mean, one of them is a locator for THC, right? And they said if you're in another country, you're going to get flagged for selling drugs if you have that app on your phone. And then there's some others as well. And then I was perusing more, and there's another one on your medications, right? So, like pills, you got to have them in the original bottles. You can't put them in the little pill organizer.
Okay.
You know, stuff like that. And also, if you have a liquid medication that's essential for your health, you can take as much as you want. You just have to take the bottle out, show it to TSA, and say, this is a life-saving chemical. It needs to be inspected separately. And they will swab it, you know, for explosives. Now, did you know if you take nitroglycerin for your heart, those pills will swab positive on your hands as explosive? If you use hand lotion, that also makes you positive for explosives. Oh my gosh, so many good tips here. So
Okay, great. But I don't have to show my phone to the police, right?
No, he
I
said
do not consent.
they need to get a warrant. He said, which they're not likely to do.
Right.
But he said, in case they do, get rid of the biometrics, because a biometric, they have the right to put your finger on the phone or put it up to your face, but they can't make you give them the passcode. So in fact, this woman too said, get rid of the biometrics when you travel, because this code is your personal code and nobody can get that from you without a warrant. So very interesting.
Interesting. So like the face recognition, you can just deactivate it. So they would need your physical code.
Faces, also the fingerprint thing too, because they could stick your fingerprint on it as well. But
my phone's new. I don't have the fingerprint thing anymore.
You know, so seniors have unsuspecting apps, and
It's true.
they can get in trouble. So
Very cool.
it's very scary. There are a couple of sites that are like this on YouTube, but this lady is a flight attendant for 15 years. She said she's seen everything.
I'll bet.
And she says a lot of people give up their medications at TSA. They don't have to. You don't have to give up your medication. If it's liquid, as I said, you could ask them to visualize it by hand. And if it's pills, keep it in the original bottles. He said TSA does not like those pill organizers. If you show up with just those, then they don't know if it's a drug or,
Yeah, that's
you
fair.
know, and then you're going to get subject to more checks and you're going to be missing your flight. So if you travel a lot, you should check it out. All right.
So when are you going, Vincent?
I'm going a week from tomorrow, Saturday.
Okay,
And we got to do a TWiV there. Yeah.
great.
Sorry you're not coming.
Sorry, I'm not coming.
Yeah, you don't like the schlep. I know that.
Yeah, I think I'm going
I
to be
had
in
to take
Oregon.
Angela one year, right?
That'd be great. Giant
Good
viruses.
idea.
I'm down. Next year when I finish my PhD.
Okay. All right, that's TWiV 1277. Show notes at microbe.tv/TWiV. You can send your questions and comments to twiv@microbe.tv. And if you enjoy these programs, we'd love your support. Microbe.tv/contribute. Rich Conda is an emeritus professor, University of Florida, Gainesville. He's currently in Austin, Texas. Thank you, Rich.
Sure enough, always a good time.
Angela Mingarelli is at McGill University Immune Vet on Blue Sky. Thank you, Angela.
Thank you. This was great. Very, very insightful. Hopeful as well. I'm hopeful for the future.
I like your optimism.
Got to be
Angela.
positive.
You have to, right? Manifest.
Yeah. I'd like to thank the American Society for Virology and the American Society for Microbiology for their support of TWiV, Ronald Jenkins for the music, and Jolene Ramsey for the timestamps. Been listening to This Week in Virology. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back next week. Another TWiV is viral.